What if the most climate-smart house ever built in America wasn't designed by an architect? It was designed for survival. Picture this. It's the early 1700s. You've just arrived in Louisiana. The air is so thick with humidity, it feels like breathing through a wet blanket. Floodwaters can rise overnight. Mosquitoes are relentless. The heat is suffocating. There's no air conditioning, no HVAC, no insulation board at the hardware store. So what do you build? You build something that has never existed anywhere else on Earth. Something born from the collision of French, African, Spanish, Caribbean, and Native American wisdom. A house so ingeniously adapted to its environment that people are still studying it today as a model for sustainable design. It's called the Creolized Raised Cottage. And by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly why architects, historians, and alternative housing fans in 2026 are calling it one of the most underrated housing designs in American history. Before we dive in, if you're new here, welcome to Affordable Tiny Homes, where we cover honest, research-backed content on alternative and unconventional housing. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a video. And stay with me until the end, because we're going to reveal a detail about how these homes were actually built that most people have never heard of. Trust me, you want to hear this one. Let's get into it. What exactly is the Creolized Raised Cottage? First, let's define the term, because it gets confused a lot. A Creole cottage and a Creolized raised cottage are related, but not the same thing. The basic Creole cottage was typically a ground level or near ground level structure, low to the street. The Creolized raised cottage, also called the Louisiana Raised Cottage, the Louisiana Planter Raised Cottage, or sometimes the Louisiana French Colonial, is the elevated evolution of that design. This structure takes the DNA of the original Creole cottage and lifts the entire living space off the ground, sometimes as much as 8 to 10 feet, placing on a brick basement or raised brick piers, while the lower level is used for storage, utility, or in some versions, even service rooms. And here's the thing that makes it truly Creolized. It is not French. It is not African. It is not Caribbean. It is not Native American. It is all of those things fused together into something entirely new, shaped by the unique demands of one of the most challenging climates in North America. One theory widely accepted by architectural historians traces the design back through the French West Indies, specifically Saint-Domingue, which we know today as Haiti. When revolution rocked Saint-Domingue between 1791 and 1808, a massive wave of Caribbean immigrants poured into Louisiana, and they brought this raised house design with them, planting it along the rivers and bayous of the Mississippi Delta. As LSU professor of architecture Michael Desmond explains, residential architecture built here by the French is rooted in medieval French wood construction, but it actually comes to Louisiana through the Caribbean, where France also had colonies. So when you look at a Creolized raised cottage, you are looking at architectural DNA that crossed an entire ocean, stopped in the Caribbean, got reinvented there, and then traveled again to Louisiana, picking up African building traditions and Native American materials along every step of that journey. Who actually built this? This is the part of the story that most design channels skip over, and it's arguably the most important part. The Creolized raised cottage is not a monument to any single culture. It is a monument to creolization itself, the process by which multiple cultures blend together and produce something genuinely new. Let's break down who contributed what. The French brought the foundational structural system, heavy braced timber frames using a technique called poteaux in terre, or post-in-earth construction, rooted in medieval Norman building traditions. They also brought the love of interior chimneys, the steeply pitched roof lines, and the instinct to organize rooms around communal gathering spaces. The Spanish, who ruled Louisiana from 1762 to 1800, introduced ironwork, the beautiful decorative iron balconies and railings that would become iconic across New Orleans and influence the courtyard planning of urban Creole architecture. The African and Caribbean builders, many of them enslaved craftsmen and women, brought irreplaceable technical knowledge. The construction of raised plantation houses along the rivers involved a level of craft that historians now credit substantially to African builders. The Destrehan Plantation House, one of the oldest surviving Creole raised cottages, built between 1787 and 1790, was constructed by a free man of color named Charles Paquette. That is not a footnote, that is the headline. The Native American contribution came through materials, specifically Spanish moss and cypress, two resources abundant in Louisiana's wetlands, became the backbone of Creole building. Native American communities had long worked with these materials, and their knowledge informed how European settlers adapted to the local landscape. And the Caribbean connection brought the raised floor itself, born from a need to manage flooding, heat, and ventilation in tropical climates very similar to Louisiana's. When Caribbean settlers arrived in Louisiana in the early 1800s, they recognized the environmental similarities immediately, and the raised plantation house traveled with them. The result is a building tradition that belongs to no single group and to all of them simultaneously. That's what Creolized actually means. The design, what makes it look and work the way it does. Okay, now let's get into the actual architecture, because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Feature 1, the raised foundation, the defining characteristic. The main living floor of a Creolized raised cottage is elevated above the ground on brick piers or a full brick basement story. This was not aesthetic, it was engineering. The high water table in Louisiana, combined with seasonal flooding from the Mississippi River and its bayous, made ground-level living dangerous and damp. Raising the floor solved flooding, reduced moisture infiltration into the structure, and, critically, created airflow beneath the house. The Destrehan Plantation, for example, elevates its main floor approximately 10 feet above ground level. Feature 2, the gallery. A gallery is not just a porch. In Creole raised cottage design, the gallery, a deep, covered veranda that wraps around some or all of the house, is an actual climate system. It shades the exterior walls from direct sun, dramatically reducing heat gain. It creates a transitional outdoor living space usable in almost any weather. Creoles famously decorated their galleries as outdoor rooms, with chair rails, wainscoting, cornices, and curtains hung from iron rods between columns to manage shade and privacy. The gallery was where families ate, socialized, and slept on hot nights. It was the original passive cooling system, and the roof design evolved specifically to make this gallery work better. Early Creole houses had what historians call broken pitch or double-pitched roofs, a steep upper slope transitioning to a shallower lower slope over the gallery. The problem was the lower slope did not shed rain efficiently, causing leaks. The solution, which became the signature of the raised cottage, was to extend the main pavilion roof in a single continuous pitch all the way to the edge of the gallery. One clean, sweeping roofline. That design became the Louisiana Raised Cottage. Feature 3, the floor plan. The floor plan of the Creolized Raised Cottage is notable for what it does not have as much as what it does. Early examples have no interior hallways. Rooms open directly into each other, a layout historians call enfilade, allowing cross-ventilation through the entire house. Air moves. Heat dissipates. There are typically 2 to 4 rooms arranged across the front, with smaller rear rooms called cabinets tucked into the back corners. These cabinets often housed spiral staircases to the attic loft, which served as sleeping quarters, especially for children. Feature 4, the roof. The roof is either hipped, sloping on all 4 sides, or gabled, depending on cultural background and period. The hipped roof became the signature of Creole architecture specifically, while gabled roofs were more associated with Cajun or Acadian cottages. This distinction became an important cultural marker. Creoles favored the hip roof partly because it managed the subtropical rains more effectively from all sides, and partly because it visually distinguished their homes from their Cajun neighbors, with whom relations were historically complicated. Feature 5, the Bousillage, and this is the detail we promised you. Here it is, the detail most people have never heard of, and it deserves its own moment. The walls of authentic Creolized raised cottages were not built with conventional brick or wood framing. They were built using a technique called Bousillage. Now, And this is the part that will make you do a double take. The word bousillage is old French slang that literally translates to fill up with dung. But the actual product was far more sophisticated than that translation suggests. Bousillage is a mixture of local clay, Spanish moss, animal hair, and sometimes straw, packed between the structural timber posts and plastered smooth on both sides. It is essentially an American version of wattle and daub or adobe, developed independently using Louisiana's own materials. The Spanish moss was gathered from the trees draping the bayous. The clay came from the banks of the Mississippi. Animal hair, often from cattle, added tensile strength so the mixture would not crack as it dried. Once packed and dried, bousillage formed a solid, insulating wall that was then plastered and painted white. It was remarkably effective at thermal regulation, absorbing excess heat and moisture during the day, releasing it slowly at night, creating a natural buffering effect that kept interior temperatures far more stable than a thin wood frame wall ever could. Before air conditioning existed, bousillage was one of the most effective building insulators available in the American South. A more refined version of this technique, called briquette entre poteaux, brick between posts, used actual fired brick as the infill for buildings where more resources were available. Both techniques fall under the Creole structural tradition, and both are part of what makes this architecture genuinely unlike anything built anywhere else in North America. Where can you still see these homes today? The good news is that real surviving examples of this architecture still exist, though they require some seeking out. Destrehan Plantation, St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, built 1787 to 1790. This is one of the oldest surviving French Creole raised cottages in the Mississippi Valley. It features the cypress timber frame, bousillage walls, brick piers, and a fully encircling gallery that defines the style. It is open to the public for tours and is an excellent first stop for anyone serious about understanding this architecture firsthand. Home Place Plantation, near Hahnville, Louisiana, often cited in academic literature as the apex example of the raised Creole plantation house. This property features a full encircling gallery on both levels, thick brick columns on the lower gallery, narrow turn columns on the upper, and exterior stairways connecting the two floors. The French Quarter, New Orleans. While the French Quarter is better known for its Creole townhouses, the urban Creole cottage, a compressed, near-ground level version of the same tradition, dominates much of the quarter's residential fabric. The historic New Orleans Collections property at 726 to 28 Toulouse Street is a documented example from the 1830s, following the standard four-room floor plan arranged around a central chimney. The Parlang Plantation, Point Capee Parish, a two-story raised cottage with bousillage walls plastered with a mixture of mud, sand, Spanish moss, and animal hair, and a detached brick kitchen. Ceiling and wall construction throughout uses close-fitting bald cypress planks, one of the most intact surviving examples of the form. You will also find versions of the raised cottage style spreading beyond Louisiana, along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Alabama, and into parts of Florida, where the same climate logic drove similar adaptations. Versions of the style reached South Carolina as well, demonstrating how a building tradition born in Louisiana diffused across the broader American South. Why the Creolized Raised Cottage matters right now in 2026. Here is the honest truth about why this style deserves your attention today, not just as history, but as a living idea. We are a moment in housing where people are rediscovering what vernacular architecture knew all along. The best houses are the ones designed for their environment, not imposed on it. The cottage housing category has been quietly growing. House plan sales data from houseplans.com shows cottage plans ticked up from 6% of house plan sales in 2024 to 7% in 2025, and the trend is firmly towards smaller footprints, better livability, and intentional design. In 2025, half of all house plans sold were between 1,000 and 1,999 square feet. People are not chasing size anymore. They're chasing quality, and they're increasingly chasing climate resilience. Meanwhile, the median U.S. home listing price now sits somewhere between $400,000 and $430,000, remaining a serious barrier for first-time and entry-level buyers, even as mortgage rates have partially stabilized. The gap between what people can afford and what the conventional market offers has never been wider for a generation of buyers. That context matters when we start talking about smart, efficient, climate-adapted small homes. Think about what the Creolized Raised Cottage actually does, stripped of all its history. It elevates the living space above flood risk. In an era of increased flooding across the Gulf Coast, Southeast, and even inland areas, this is not a historical curiosity. It is a genuinely modern solution. It uses deep, overhanging galleries to block solar heat gain. Modern passive house and bioclimatic design research confirms this principle repeatedly. Shading the building envelope is one of the single most effective ways to reduce cooling loads without mechanical systems. It uses thick, thermally massive walls, whether Bousillage or modern equivalents like rammed earth, adobe, or insulated concrete forms, to buffer temperature swings between day and night. It positions rooms for cross-ventilation through enfilade layout, eliminating wasted hallway space and letting air move freely through the structure. It uses local materials, cypress wood, clay, moss, rather than importing energy-intensive industrial products from across the country. Every single one of those principles is exactly what 21st century sustainable architects are advocating for right now. The people who built the first Creolized raised cottages in Louisiana 300 years ago did not have building science degrees. They had something just as powerful: generations of accumulated wisdom about how to live comfortably in a difficult climate without spending a fortune. You do not need to build a 4,000 square foot mansion with a 3-car garage. You need a well-positioned, climate-adapted home that keeps you comfortable without bleeding you dry on energy bills. That is precisely what the Creolized Raised Cottage was built to do. Could you build a modern version today? Absolutely. And some people already are. Modern interpretations of the raised cottage are appearing across the Gulf South and beyond. The raised foundation is now typically achieved with concrete piers or a full concrete or masonry basement rather than handmade brick piers. The Bousillage walls have modern equivalents in spray foam, rammed earth, or exterior insulation finish systems. Though some builders working in the vernacular tradition have experimented with actual Bousillage revival as a natural building technique. The gallery, the deep covered porch, translates directly to modern construction. Builders in Louisiana, Mississippi, and coastal Texas regularly incorporate 8 to 12-foot deep covered porches that replicate the thermal performance of the original gallery without any specialized technology or cost premium. The hipped roof is widely available as a framing option and carries a meaningful modern benefit. It performs better in high wind conditions compared to gabled roofs. FEMA building science guides and insurance incentive programs have noted this repeatedly in post-hurricane assessments. If you're building in a hurricane-prone area, the hipped roof is not just historically authentic, it is the smarter structural choice. For alternative housing enthusiasts, the floor plan logic of the raised cottage, compact, cross-ventilated, no wasted hallway space, maps beautifully onto contemporary small home and ADU design. An 800 to 200 square foot raised cottage with a full-width gallery is a genuinely functional, genuinely beautiful small home that costs far less to cool and heat than conventional slab-on-grade construction in a warm climate. There is also the regulatory reality to consider. Raised foundations are increasingly required or strongly incentivized in FEMA flood zone areas, particularly in the Southeast. If you are building in a flood zone, you may actually be legally required to raise your structure, which means the Creolized raised cottage philosophy is not just smart design. It is a compliant design. The Creolized raised cottage is one of America's most original architectural inventions. It was not designed at a drafting table. It was built by people who had no margin for error: French settlers, African craftsmen, Caribbean immigrants, and Native American guides, who pooled their knowledge in one of the most demanding environments on the continent and produced a housing form so well adapted that it is still being studied as a model for sustainable design 3 centuries later. It raised the living space above floods. It shaded itself with galleries. It breathed through enfilade room layouts. It insulated itself with Bousillage. It embraced local materials and local knowledge. And it looked absolutely stunning doing all of it. In 2026, when we talk about affordable, resilient, climate-adapted housing, we should be talking about this, not as a museum piece, as a blueprint.